being here. This is so exciting to have all this energy here tonight. So, again, I wanted to thank you for coming to this important conversation around sex and sexuality, especially from the interfaith perspective. This event tonight is intended to bring light to the beautiful, charged, and difficult subjects of sex and sexuality, topics that are so important and integral to our lives, but so often dismissed as too taboo for ordinary conversation. And right from the start, I want to acknowledge that we don't know exactly where this conversation is going to go, and that the words that we share will impact everyone in the room differently. So we encourage you each to take care of yourselves and each other. It's okay to leave the room and come back. Check in with your neighbors and your friends as you feel moved. And also we have food, as you've all noticed, so please feel free to get up and grab some food or drinks as you need or want. So sexual formation manifests differently across cultures, races, classes, family systems, and religions. As a young girl emerging from a two-parent, white, Jewish, middle-class household, I experienced a wonderfully brief and awkward conversation with my parents about sex when I was maybe 12 years old. I left that conversation with the impression that no matter what, when I had my first sexual encounter, the last thing I was going to do was talk to my parents about it. They were explaining to me my sexual morals from some script I wasn't even sure they followed themselves. And plus, they seemed almost more uncomfortable than I did. The sad thing is that when it did come time for me to figure out sex in the world, I was totally unsure of myself, and I didn't have a strong voice of wisdom to guide me and help me along. I can't say how common my own experience was, but I do wonder how much young people understand what it means emotionally to have sex. I wonder how common the feeling is that the entire world is slated against your ability to express your sexuality. I wonder if others have felt shamed or disempowered by their sexuality. I wonder how others who have struggled with low self-esteem relate to attention by the opposite sex or the same sex. I wonder if feminine presenting people growing up in this world also feel the same pressure to bury their feelings or to make other people happy first. Self-love, boundaries, and mutual respect were things I had to learn the hard way. Did others have to do that too? Sex is quite literally life-giving. It's a source of joy, love, and connection. Sex, however, also exposes the most vulnerable aspects of ourselves to another person, and as such can create the conditions for immense amounts of harm to occur. Through our sexuality, we can reveal to one another our own tenderness, through which we find joy, love, connection, and partnership. Sexuality can and should be a source of celebration. But when our sexuality is incorrect, mistaken, taken advantage of, or used in harmful ways, it can lead to loneliness, isolation, depression, and self-hatred. Sex and sexuality in settings of faith have been particularly poignant topics, as faith communities have had to muddle through rampant sexual abuse by clergy and widespread exclusion and shaming of members of our LGBTQ communities. In the midst of our various sexual differences and wounds, our calling as communities of faith is to carve out space for listening to one another's perspectives, as a first step towards the goal of finding common ground and understanding that might serve to heal some of these wounds. As leaders and future leaders of faith communities, as academics, as chaplains, as social workers, and as parents, my hope is that we might work together to correct the lack of support that is out there for our communities around sex and sexuality. Starting first and foremost by simply striking up a conversation. So without further ado, I want to thank you all so much for your bravery in being here tonight. And also our sincerest gratitude to the panelists that have come to share with us their wisdom and their many years of experience around this difficult and life-giving topic.
Oh, being old.
And now I would like to introduce Erin Wagner, who is going to help us understand what we mean by the terms sex and sexuality.
Hi everyone. I first want to thank Kim for all of her hard work putting this together, from scrambling to get chairs to food to wrangling all these different clubs to making this happen. So my name is Erin. I am representing Sacred Worth. Many of our members are also here today. And I'm hopeful that this event can be a starting point for those who work with words and spirits and bodies in this place to start wrapping some language around a topic that has been so harmful for so many people. Where can we in this room begin breathing life? And with full knowledge that language evolves and changes and is never perfect, we want to begin by defining some of the terms that Kim even started to use in the opening statement, mainly the difference between sex and sexuality. The two get conflated. When we talk about sex, we're talking about the affirmative physical yes between consenting adults. This can look a lot of different ways. Like Kim said, sex brings life, gives pleasure, and both its presence and absence are defining features of human experience. There are a lot of gaps in this brief definition, and that we have to live in the gray a little bit. And when we talk about sexuality, we mean a capacity for sexual feelings, the emotional and relational intimacy that brings us together. It doesn't just stop in the bedroom, and it helps us describe what it means to be a body in relation to other bodies. So with sex, we have this very physical, incarnate type of thing, and sexuality is the capacity for that in our daily lives. So Esther Perel claims that the erotic is an antidote to death. And now Julia is going to help introduce the folks on the panel that might help us continue to pursue life.
Thank you all so much for being here. We have incredible panelists tonight, and it's really an honor to introduce them. So tonight we have Reverend Joan Amaral. Reverend Joan Amaral established Zen Center North Shore in 2012 and is currently the guiding teacher at the center. She has been bestowed the honor of being named Dharma heir of Zenkai Blanche Hartman in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, and she is the first female abbess of an American Zen Buddhist monastery. She holds a degree from Georgetown University, and she has since studied to become a chaplain at the Satai Center in Redwood City, California. She also trained at Tashahara Zen Mountain Center for 6 years. Reverend Joan Amaral is primarily interested in the intersection of formal Buddhist practice and the busyness of everyday life, and she has also provided Zen training for Spanish speakers. Recently, she has been exploring topics of social justice, self-care, and creativity in her practice. Tonight we also have Reverend Kim Crawford Harvey. Reverend Kim Crawford Harvey was ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister in 1984 and is currently serving as the senior minister at Arlington Street Church in Boston. She is a graduate of Middlebury College and Harvard Divinity School, and she is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Provincetown Citizen of the Year Award in 1988, Harvard Divinity's First Decade Award in 1992, Distinguished Alumni Award from Middlebury College in 1992, and she was named one of the 100 Outstanding Women in the Commonwealth in 2002. Some of her work includes helping youth with HIV/AIDS and empowering LGBTQ teenagers. In 2004, she performed the first same-sex marriage in a church in the United States. Tonight we also have Reverend Dana Gonzal. Reverend Gonzal currently serves as the senior pastor at the First Baptist Church in Dorchester, Mass. He joined the People's Baptist Church in 2002 and was ordained by the American Baptist Churches USA in 2016. He He studied at Boston University School of Theology, Gordon Conwell Theological Center, and Andover Newton Theological Seminary, and he was named the Claude Black Scholar in 2013. Pastor Dana is involved with several community organizations, including the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, the American Baptist Churches of Massachusetts, the Boston Southwest Association, and the Board of Fellows for Andover Newton at Yale Divinity School. He also serves as the Senior Protestant Chaplain at Nashua Street Jail. And finally, we have Reverend Bernadette Hickman-Maynard. Reverend Bernadette Hickman-Maynard currently serves as a pastor of the Bethel African Methodism Episcopal Church in Lynn, Mass. She studied at Harvard University, earning a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in education and human development in psychology, and a master's in divinity. She has largely concentrated her work in youth development and education. This has included programs for tutoring, mentoring, and youth leadership. She also led a nonprofit organization that centered on music education, mentoring, and educational advocacy, and she serves as a consultant to churches and nonprofits regarding youth development. She also works toward racial equality and is the racial justice organizer at the Essex County Community Organization. So we have some incredible speakers tonight. And before turning it over to them, I just want to give a special thanks to the New Testament and Queer Theory class that came here as an entire class. So thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll turn over to Caro to give a few words.
Our class is really excited to be here and have some spaces where we can understand some of the theoretical things that we've been learning in our class and really working through very intellectually in a contextual setting. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And now we'll have our opening prayer by Reverend Bernadette.
Stand here. Would we all like to stand? If you all feel comfortable reaching out and holding hands and touching and agreeing, let us go and turn toward the Spirit. Oh God, eternal God, the author of our life, the one who gives us life, who animates our lives. We thank you for this opportunity to gather in conversation about a particularly special dimension of our life, God. And we pray that you would grant us peace. We pray that you would grant us courage. We pray that you would grant us understanding and that we might find you in the dialogue, that we might express you in our fullest sense, that we might be courageous enough to show up in all of our glory and yours. We pray that you might grant us the courage to ask the deep questions that are on our hearts and the courage to speak the truth as we know it. God, we pray that we might find you in our midst today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
I just want to introduce myself really quick. I'm Chastity, a second year MDiv, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. So we're just going to start off by giving each of our panelists a minute or two to speak a little bit about yourselves. We've heard about you, but we want to hear a little bit about you from you.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
All right, I'll start. I'm Kim. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. See, you heard all about me. There's one piece that I'll say, which is that Unitarian Universalists invented Our Whole Lives, which is a comprehensive sex ed class. Did any of you grow up with that, or have you been exposed to it here? Yeah. Anyway, my commitment has been to continue to teach that, having been taught and raised on that. I now do that, and I think my colleagues think I'm a little crazy, like why am I hanging around with the 6th graders? But I think it's the moment that a lot of us lose the kids, and I listened to that and thought about it and prayed about it, and I thought, if my minister talked to me about sex, about sexuality, and thought it was that important that like the person they saw as kind of running the church wanted to talk to them about it, that it would become sacred to them. That they would know it as holy, and also that they would know that they could talk to me. And so I feel like that's an important part of tonight's conversation, and we might not get into it, but I can talk to you about what it's like to be raised in a church where it's all good. It's really something. I feel very lucky, very blessed. So that's a little about me.
Amen.
Dana.
My name is Pastor Dana Gonzalez. I personally did not grow up in the church. I did not believe in God. I did not believe in Jesus Christ. But He believed in me. I've had the privilege of always being able to talk openly and honestly with my parents from the age of 5 about sex. I've always had experiences from a very young age, so like I'm sure some of you might have had that experience too. I'll talk about that later. What I think is important is the ability to be able to share how you feel about sex openly and honestly, whether you agree with some things, whether you don't agree with some things, and I'll leave it until we're able to engage each other that way. Amen.
Thank you. I'm Reverend Bernadette Hickman-Maynard. I am currently a pastor, but I grew up in a conservative Baptist church where women could not be pastors, and had a very repressive view of sex. It was actually, in my congregation, talked about a lot, just in the negative, right? Don't do it, don't touch it, don't do it, don't be there, don't. Don't go. Bad, except if you are heterosexual in marriage, then good. But we don't talk about anything before that. So I grew up, that was the church I grew up. I was parented by a single mom who bought me a book and was like, there, find your answers in the book. And I was grateful for that, because at least I had a book. But I had to unlearn and unwork, and I got married I was 22, and I said, no, he was 22, I was 20, and feel like I had to unlearn a whole lot of the stuff, that baggage, let go of and unlearn and relearn things. And as a pastor now, I feel like I'm in a place where I want to be able to teach a healthier sexuality, but I am in the context of a very traditional church for which our discourse on sexuality is not the healthiest. And so I am working through that.
So I'm Joan, Reverend Joan Amaral. So I'm a Zen priest, a Buddhist priest. And I should clarify in my bio, it's my teacher who's the first abbess, not me. So sorry about that. You get me. She, she died a few years ago. I trained in a monastery in California. It was co-ed. You would think it would be very open, but surprisingly, I felt that one of the reasons I left that monastery and was ready to come out, or decided to come out to establish my own practice place, was because I felt that there were walls, about, first of all, actually being a woman priest. That I felt like unless I looked and sounded and behaved like a man, that I might not be taken as seriously as a woman. And this is kind of shocking. This is California. This is the year 2012, at that point. So that was a real motivator for me to come out and establish my own practice place, which I feel is kind of an incubator, where we're exploring what it is to be a woman in front of an altar, wearing the robes and holding that space. in a Buddhist tradition. And then also specifically to look at sex and sexuality. And I feel very humbled by you all. Like the way you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I have to offer? Except that it is powerful to hold, even the words sex and religion or sex and priest in a healthy way. So I'm really grateful to have this space to explore this together tonight, and I do hope that I can offer something that's helpful. One other aspect of this for me is, I do a lot of racial social justice work with immigrants and asylum seekers in particular, and it really is feeling more and more, or less and less like helping immigrants and asylum seekers, as it is more of a mutual kind of support. Like, I don't want to live in a world without Venezuelans, without Africans, the people who in my life are bringing me so much through their dance, their music, their food. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I was trained as a dancer, a modern dancer, choreographer. So for me, religious practice is about the body, is about embodiment. So maybe we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that.
And Joan, when you say come out, you mean come out of the monastery?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. I
Yes.
just thought I should, in case there's a cute boy here, I just thought I should
All right, I'm the straight girl here. I identify, I guess. I mean, okay, let's put it. I've always been attracted to guys. Although when in our tradition we shave our heads, I was getting a lot of attention from the girls, and that was really interesting. So there's a lot of gender identity stuff that starts to get mixed up in there, with shaving the head and working with appearances and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
Great. You bet. Just trying to help out where I can.
Thank you to all. Just a quick note, Kim is going to be passing around a basket and colored pencils for you to jot down your notes if you prefer to ask them anonymously. And in the second half of our discussion, I'll be picking from those. So just so you know. And for our panelists, if I ask a question and you want to go, just raise your hand and the floor is yours. So I'm going to start with our juicier questions.
Let's just come right to it.
I'm taking my shoes off. Our first question is, how does your faith tradition inform your own relationship to sexuality?
Okay. Well, I would say I grew up in a Catholic tradition, and I didn't have much happening there. But when I entered the Buddhist world, as I said, it was a little bit surprising, except the insistence on being embodied, and that was the connection between being trained as a dancer and then coming into Buddhist practice, which is practice. It's about meditation, so it's about being in the body and being in the breath. And we were in this beautiful mountain valley that Kim knows, she trained there too. It's very sexy. It's very alive. All of life is happening there, and there is something gorgeous about sitting in silence. Men and women sitting in silence in the body, with the body, and sitting cross-legged. Everything is open. There's one other thing too, which is in our tradition. I spoke about my teacher. And I'd be interested to hear from the Christian perspective too. There's this warm hand to warm hand transmission of the Dharma. It's a very intimate connection with your teacher. And you're alone in rooms called Doksan. You're sitting together. And I've had experiences, and maybe this is going into the sex scandal stuff too quickly, but this for sure is an environment where it can get really weird really quickly, and this is so unfortunate because it's right where depth and intimacy and even love, I would say, can happen if it's not sexualized. So I've had experiences sitting, open across from teachers, like cute male teachers, where it got a little confusing because I literally, I'm gonna go for it, felt the juices flowing. I was open and I was aroused. And but then I also felt that with my own teacher, Blanche, who was at the time 85 years old, So this was such a gift to be able to experience that with her, because it gave me the space to really look at this, And when we talk in our tradition of the precepts, I vow not to misuse sexuality, for me it's extremely important that it's not just about harmful sex, abuse, but it's also about the ways that we squelch our life force, that juiciness out of fear. Okay, I'll stop there. See a lot of nods. Yeah.
Anyone else?
So, mine was opposite of you. Squelch. Do not awaken. I grew up, for me, my faith tradition, as I said before, was conservative Baptist. And we were taught that the only healthy expression of sexuality was in the context of marriage between a man and a woman. And in my youth group, there was, anybody know True Love Waits? True Love Waits. So it was a program where you pledge to your parents, to your father, if you're a girl usually, and God, that you will not have sex until you get married. I did that. I have the ring. I still have the ring. I didn't send it into Nadia Boltz-Welber to, shape it to the vulva, but that would have been cool. But I still have it. So you have this, this series of lessons, and there's this, there's a ball. Some people have a ball and a dance. We didn't do that. I didn't have a father in my life, but it was very much that you only have. That's the best expression for it. So everything was about, I Kissed Dating Goodbye came about when I was in high school, and so we all had that book, and you don't date, you only date if you think that you can get married, and so you're always like, don't touch, don't hold hands, don't do this, because you don't want to awaken the life force. And so I did not awaken. And I was also probably pretty unique in that I didn't have a whole lot of crushes, but I would say that there was this one time when because I was tired of being a goody two-shoes, I decided that I wanted to have, this boy had, continuously been after me, and I was like, no. But I was like, oh, okay, let's just make out. So we didn't have intercourse, but we had oral sex, and we had, sort of digital, penetration, stimulation. After that, I felt so guilty, but this is where the faith part comes in. I felt like God hated me. I had to repent. He was suicidal. It was that bad. And so the other question is what could you tell your former self? Let it go. It'd be much easier. But there was so much guilt, and I will say in terms of that, and I'll give the floor. So that was that one experience that I had. I didn't ever have a serious boyfriend until my husband, and we were still. I was like, I had repented. I'm still claiming my virginity, which is so important. And we were engaged, and my husband Teddy and I, we had sex. And then felt so guilty, moved up our wedding. Now we got married, we got engaged beforehand, but because again, the guilt, the sackcloth and ashes, and the crying and the guilt. And then we were like, oh no, well why wait? We've set our date for June, and then we said, well, we gotta move it up. Because we had sex, and it felt good, and we want to continue having sex, and so we can't do it because God hates that, and so we had to move up our wedding. Wow. That was my faith. All up in sexuality. Yeah.
I appreciate the open dialogue. I come at this a lot different, ladies.
Yes.
As I told you, I was very young. I was 6 years old when I had my first sexual encounter, which was way too young, no doubt about that. I was lucky that it was females for me, because I have always been attracted to females too. Did not have a clue what was going on. I felt so uncomfortable at 6, but at 7, I knew exactly where all the parts fit, and I knew exactly which way I wanted to go. But what I discovered later on was I became addicted to sex. I was into pornography. I was into all kinds of things. I always felt comfortable with women. You know, I always liked women. I always liked them. And when I became a Christian, kind of leaning in this direction, but I woke up one morning before I got saved, and I asked, why? I was addicted. When I say addicted, I say I have a woman in the morning, I have a woman for lunch, I'd have a woman at night. I would rotate because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed them, they enjoyed me. And one morning I woke up, I said to myself, I'm insecure. Why else would I need all these types of relationships if I wasn't insecure? So when I became a Christian, I became celibate for a period of time. And it always emerged that I was still sexually attracted to women. What I've discovered as I've gotten older is that the more sex you have with the different partners you have, you will lose something in the process. You need a moment to connect with somebody on a human level. You need to have somebody that you can say, this is somebody I love for who they are, not what they are. And right now, I'm fortunate to have a relationship where I'm in love with my wife 13 years later, and it's about our spiritual, mental, and emotional connection. And I never thought I'd ever be able to do that because I was so busy into other things. And I still struggle to this moment with my sexuality. So we're going to talk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Do you want us to all answer this?
I mean, if you have something.
I'm just feeling very vanilla up here.
You guys are a little hot over there.
I mean, we just always talked about it. We talked about it at church. We talked about it at home. It was all good. It was great as long as it was consensual. It was fine. You know, there was none of this business. It was just like great, still great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel very boring. I feel that my faith tradition has made me very boring about this because it's just not an issue. It's just not an issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel lucky too.
It's cool.
I feel lucky.
Yeah.
Next question. How does your faith tradition define a wholesome, healthy, and inclusive attitude towards sex and sexuality?
I realize today that nobody in this room has a moral compass to determine what is right and what's wrong in terms of our sexuality. We're all attracted to certain things one way or the other, or not attracted to it, whatever the case may be. I try my best to, as a pastor, to keep boundaries, because boundaries are important, especially if you're a clergy. Because you can harm families, you can harm people. If you're not respected of the holiness that you present, at least as far as I'm concerned, then there's an issue for me. I think it's important to talk about it. You need to be honest about how you're feeling sexually. I shared with you at the beginning, my mother and father were both very promiscuous folk. They were not married. And they were always able to talk to me about things that I always wanted to ask. Like, Dad, why is my penis straight every time I see a pretty girl at 5 years old? My mother's like, son, that's how it works. And so I was able to talk. And when you are able to talk about those things, you're not restricted and you don't feel as though you're in a bad place, because none of us really do have the moral compass. But God does expect a certain holiness if you're a Christian like I am.
I think it's an edge. I really appreciate, this is really cool.
It is cool.
You know, it's really so wonderful you're here.
You too.
Thank you.
All three of you.
Well, no, but you in particular, because how you're speaking, you know, and I heard you say that you were terrified at the beginning, and I'm terrified too about being here, but it is just a conversation, and you know, and so this thing about clergy, you know, and holding the sacred, I think and I hope this answers the question, but what I'm feeling is, so in Zen, everything's practice. You know, we work with just whatever's going on, turning to it. And so, you know, one of the things that's coming up for me is I talked about the Doksan room, you know, in particular. I think there is a challenge right now I'm having as a woman priest. I've let my hair go gray, and that was intentional. But I'm finding it challenging I can see how it's much easier to be a woman trying to be a man, you know, in terms of younger students who are going to transfer and project onto me. So it's a little bit of a struggle to want to be my fully sexual, womanly self, and also to take care of younger people who are so vulnerable and tender. You know, so we're working in our Sangha, in our community at the Zen Center, we're really working with this actively right now. I'd like to say we're being proactive before something really big happens, because I feel like something really big is probably going to happen, you know. There was a series of men, this is not being recorded, is it? I'm not going to use names.
It is.
There is, it is. Okay, no names, but I'm going to say it anyway. There was a series of men in the spring who I felt were kind of ganging up on me in a way, who weren't really taking me seriously, God bless you, as a woman. And it was like the first front of challenge. You know, like transference and projection, it's not always sexualized. Like, I feel like we can't really talk about sex in this context without talking about power. And women who are leading sanghas and churches, you know, in the Me Too movement, it stirred a whole lot up. So I'm finding it very helpful right now to not be isolated, you know, and this actually is very helpful in the process, you know, being among peers and talking about these things directly. And within our Sangha, to just bring it forward, to talk about how transference and projection works. You know, particularly in a context where it's spiritual and it's religious and there's mystery, and you know, we're in the absolute and it's not so tangible, and it is powerful to be clergy.
Yes.
You know, there is a way that I want to keep learning how to hold my power, you know, how to honor the sacredness of that without abandoning myself, you know, in my own sexual needs. And I do feel it's very helpful now that I have a partner. That's very, very helpful, because there are subtle ways that it could leak out, you know, the neediness. But I really do feel that ultimately what's most helpful is to return to vulnerability, to like this, to return to conversation, to return to what we would call beginner's mind, which is open and soft, sexy, because it's available, it's not trying to know, it's not trying to control, and to do that in a group.
I mean, I'll say a third time that I don't think my faith tradition has a healthy view of sexuality. And I think it's my task and those of us who believe that there is within the tradition a possibility for healthy sexual theology, a healthy theology of sexuality to be expressed. It's up to us to construct it. I think it must include a statement that sexuality is a gift, and that it brings life. That what's the most important, and this is part of our tradition in the scripture. You know, Jesus commanded, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. We're called to love God. We're called to love others. We're called to love ourselves. And the degree to which our sexuality is a healthy expression of that, And we need to focus on the quality of our love, period. Not, body part A and orifice B, right? But that God ultimately is concerned about the quality of our love for ourselves, for others, and then how we talk about sexuality within that context. And I think that's important that we begin to do. Now, I'm curious though, since you just have the faith tradition that's just on point with it. what it is
I know.
essential
What else
theology.
can I say? It's sort of like love, right? Love deeply. Be really respectful. Be really good at communicating, right? Ask a lot of questions. Show up. Be present. Ask yourself those questions. Just stay as close to your truth as you can, right? Make sure it's consensual. I mean, the power piece. Do a lot of you want to be ministers? Is there a few of you? Yeah, I mean, we can't talk about this enough. We cannot talk about it enough. That's strange, the way that sexuality and power have been elided and abused in our tradition. I just always remember, when the sexual abuse scandal broke in Boston among the Roman Catholic priests and the Globe exposed that. I don't know if you're aware of that. That kind of started here. But I was so proud of my profession before that. Like, I was so honored to be a minister. And I felt so much honor for my colleagues because it's hard work. And I really believe that we're doing good work. We're trying to do good work. And after that happened, like, I was so shattered. Like, after that movie, I just sat in the movie theater and I just sobbed. Like, I just couldn't believe that my colleagues would abuse their trust that way. And it's not that, I did my master's thesis on the sexual abuse of children, but somehow I just missed the piece that clergy were doing it. It was just beyond the pale for me. So it's really important that we're talking about this, and no matter what, to never ever abuse that power or abuse that trust, right? But the tradition is very big on establishing consent and the lines of consent. That everybody has to be an adult, and one person can't have power over the other. That's just how it is. That's just, there's a period at the end of that sentence. There's nothing more about that.
And it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah, it can be really hard. I think learning the boundaries is really, really important, and I think especially when you're younger, it's harder. Yeah, it gets easier. But everybody needs to be all in with their hearts and their truth. And that's just beautiful. Then it's great. And Joan, I feel like you should talk more about dance, because I feel like dance is such a great way.
My God, well,
Right?
we're picking up something on this side of the room because we both salsa dance, okay?
Whoa.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
did it in
Sexy to that.
Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Oh, they are a prophetic resistance summit, right?
Yeah.
Which, that wonderful phrase, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution.
Goldman.
Yes.
Wow.
I don't we live by that, right? Yes. I think that is fundamental dance to all of this, And do you want to say anything before I go off on my thing?
Well, you could go off on your thing. But I was thinking about another question that led me, because I dance. I liturgical dance. I have ballet dance. I've done a number of dance. And one of the questions was, how is sexual desire harmful to spiritual practice, or how can it help spiritual practice? And dance for me is where this sort of, on both the harm and the help side. Harm in the sense that women have often been responsible for male sexual desire, and so how I express myself through liturgical dance has been mitigated by people saying you can't wear this, you can't dance, you can't move in this particular way because you were too attractive, or you can't make sure your breasts are showing this, and so it has been, you are responsible for protecting, men's desires so that they don't get too, sexually aroused by seeing you. My spiritual practice, my expression, I find dance to be a spiritual practice, has been limited by that. But on the flip side, coming alive fully and wanting to be fully alive and to move whatever way feels best to me in an authentic expression of my love for my Creator, there's sexuality that is, exuded in that, and is very much helpful, I would say, to be present and to be confident in who you are as a sexual being. I feel like my dance is a reflection of that, even, for those who can then worship with me in that. At the same time as I'm then, make sure you're not moving this way. But now I'm the pastor. And so I dance still in church, at times, and I dance the way I want to dance, wearing what I want to wear. and people are actually, people really value it as well. And I've been committed for it too. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was so fun to dance together, and I was just so happy to know that you salsa danced. And I mean, so I was performing in San Francisco, modern dance, and then I started Zen practice, and I stopped performing, and people would say, do you miss dancing? And I said, well, I haven't stopped. It just looks like this. And I mean it, that when I was performing, it was performing. And it was production, and it was ego, and I wasn't really happy. I felt actually really far away from my body, from the bodily experience, like the joy of being embodied and expressing something. So sitting in meditation, it's just my own healing process. I was in the mountains for a long time, just sitting in silence in those mountains, and I feel like I got my life back, I got my body back in a really interesting way, and so I've continued to explore how now, the relationship between movement and stillness, and how I think it's very important as a Buddhist who meditates every day, that we challenge our notion, we Buddhists, of stillness, that it not fall into stagnation and complacency. That it's important to keep moving because we are alive. So, and even when we're sitting in stillness, it's not really still. Our heart's beating, and hopefully, blood's circulating and energy is moving. It's just appreciation. It's being able to appreciate that stillness is really more like non-distraction. So I wanted to come back to something you said about that. My partner has been, thought he was polyamorous, and so I did an investigation around polyamory, which I do want to say again, California 20 years, this never came up. I moved to New England, all of a sudden I'm hanging out with polyamorous people, and so that was really challenging for me. And I just want to say about that so I explored that a little bit, and it was a lot of work to have more than one partner. But it was interesting, to just practice with that a little bit. And what I came to see, and what I've worked with my partner on, he really liked that it's not so much, I'm really not interested in monogamy as an attitude, like, it's like, oh, well, if you're not polyamorous, that means you're monogamous. Well, that's not quite right. Can't I be devoted? What I'm interested in is devotion. And it's actually not devotion to my partner, although that does come up. I do feel devotion arise there. It's mostly that I feel devoted to my own unfolding life process that includes him and everybody else. And so that devotion became like this non-distraction, because ultimately I do think that sexual relationships, healthy, sexual relationships are potentially extremely healing. And that in the act of sex, of having sex, just the release, in terms of and I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm studying this, so I feel very, very vulnerable right now talking about this. At our Zen Center, we have had classes and workshops on sex, and not many people come. Oh. I knew that was going to happen. Okay, first of all, let me clarify, and I know I'm talking a lot, I'm going to stop in a minute, but let me just clarify. I said to the person person who came to lead the workshop, okay, we're not having sex, okay? And it's not necessarily that we're gonna just sit around and talk about it, but that's not what we're doing. We're not gonna have a sex workshop. But I think it was even enough that in New England, and with Buddhist practitioners, you know, who kind of hang out, I guess, I don't know, in stillness, I don't know, that I noticed it was really interesting that people, no one really showed up, and there was a small group, and because we didn't want to talk about it as like sex, you know, we wanted to, we're talking about sexual literacy and actually being able to have, you know, environments where it's safe to be brave. That's really more what we were interested in, and I can't even remember where I was going with all this, but is this
It's pretty
you guys
funny.
Yeah, okay.
It was.
You want to jump into any of that devotion, you know, of this, oh yes, I was just getting to the juicy part of like orgasm, you know, of this release, which in meditation, some people understand the meditative process as a practice for life, as a rehearsal process for dying, for the ultimate letting go, the ultimate release. And I see sex right in there with that, of this release and this letting go. And one of the sexiest titles I've ever seen is Norman Fisher's book. He's a Zen priest and poet, called Opening to You. And so this is about dropping the ego, dropping notions of you're over there and I'm over here and we're separate. And what better way to practice this with so much enjoyment than in this sexual union? You know? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would just like to clarify before moving on to our next question that the slips of paper are meant to write a question, if you have a question, that we can ask our panelists in our questions from you section. So I don't think I said that exactly the first time, but yes, please jot down your questions if you have any. Okay, our last juicy question, which you kind of answered already. Can you talk about the ways in which you feel sexual desire might be a hindrance to spiritual practice? On the flip side, can you talk about how sexual desire might be used as a positive addition for spiritual practice?
You know, I think the Zen people have this right. I just, as someone who practices Zen also, I'm just gonna like own that. But I just remember George Leonard created this thing called, he called it the Fuckathon. And what it was this maybe 2 hours long multimedia production of just images of, I think it was just humans, but it might have been lots of animals having sex. And at first it was pretty interesting. It was like pretty amazing. It was kind of astounding actually. And then about 20 minutes in it gets really boring. Like really boring. And by the time it's done, like you're either asleep or you just like want someone to put you out of your misery watching this, and you realize like it's been totally flattened out. Right? There's just no more energy in it. And I think so. George Leonard was a great Zen practitioner and Aikido master. And I think the point was like anything to which we give that kind of attention and even devotion will have a cycle of kind of like there will be desire and interest and energy, and then it ebbs, right? So I remember being on my very first Zen retreat, and on the third day of silence, Jack Kornfield said, today's the day, as you sit in silence, that every sexual experience you've ever had is going to arise in your mind. Like, you're going to be sitting there on the cushion, and anything that ever happened to you, that you made happen, that you love, that you hated, it's all going to be up for you. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of icky, like sitting in this room full of people and you know what they're thinking, you know? But we were supposed to kind of make our way through that. And in fact, I don't know if it was the power of suggestion, but afterwards we were all comparing notes when we were not supposed to be talking. We were all comparing notes about how that was, and it was like, right. At first it was like, whoa, wow, like just being completely bowled over on the cushion. And then it was like, this is so boring, I might actually be able to return to my meditation. So I think there's just a way in which the energy, so I'm really in your field now, but sort of work with the energy appropriately, and actually give it its due. Like, I actually think, I don't mean to pick on the Catholics, but that film really did me in. So I'm just gonna say, why were all those Catholic priests abusing their power? Because squelch, 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 right? It was all like, everything was forbidden. They were pushing away, and then there was like an explosion. It was like a pressure cooker, right? And I think that we've seen that in this country. You know, the head of the guys who founded the like gay conversion therapy, that fake conversion therapy, they're all queer, right? And they're all trying not to be. So I just think whatever we resist persists. And so to open our hearts and really welcome it, and to kind of metabolize it, whether that's in meditation or prayer or dance, or just in having beautiful conversations or sitting here talking with you, there's a life cycle to that, and then we can get down to other things. Yeah.
I'm a chaplain inside a jail. It gets real. Yeah, it gets real. I met a guy once who said that he got a call from his mother-in-law that his girlfriend had committed suicide. The reason she had committed suicide, and wait a minute, let me back that up. And he wanted him to take care of her 2 children. The reason that she committed suicide was because she had been molested by the guy that had molested her. Now, this guy is about 6'5", 3 and some change, East Boston gangster. And that guy was bawling his eyes out. Sometimes your first encounter or your encounter with sex is somebody does something to you, which is what I was telling you in the beginning. And how you respond, most of the guys that I ministered to in the jail, a lot of them have been abused. And so I say that to put that out there. As pastors or wherever you're going to go, you're going to encounter that. And as you minister to that, that's where the boundaries are important. That's where you need to say, well, I do represent a holy God. If you're a Christian, I am a Christian. I'm going to keep saying that. And God is honest about this. He says, I expect my people to be holy. But listen to the pain of people and their experiences. Because if you block people out, you will never be able to minister to them. So you can't be so high and mighty that you're not anthropomorphic. You're not there. You're not involved with them. Because the more you're involved with people, the more you can minister to them. Sort of like being of the world or in the world, not of the world. And that's going to be a very challenging balance for you as pastors or as ministers. So I hope that kind of alludes to the answer.
Thank you. Anyone else before moving to the next question?
Sidebar.
Talking about us.
We can move on.
Yeah, we're good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now we're moving on to sexual ethics, justice, and liberation. What does your tradition say about masturbation and self-pleasure? In what ways do you teach those or not?
All right, I'm going to say it. So in the monastery, we give what's called a way-seeking mind talk. you know, about how we came to practice and what keeps us practicing. You know, like it's basically a story of our suffering. And what I shared was, because it's powerful when you're preparing for the talk, you're thinking about your whole life. And I've realized that there is a strong connection between my beginning Zen practice, this is a public confession, and my beginning masturbation. I had never masturbated until I was in my early 30s. Unbelievable, I know. As a woman, I had a lot of boyfriends earlier than that, and it was a way that I was like, oh, here, you do me, you know, because you could do it much better than I could. That was the idea I had. So I love that this is framed in the context of liberation. This is really interesting. So for me, masturbation is about the beginnings of me starting to value me, starting to honor this, including pleasure, and not just kind of survival mode. I mean, I grew up in a lower middle income class family in New Hampshire. It was always a struggle about money, and it was, my father grew up, he had 3 brothers, and one mother was French Canadian, only spoke French. I mean, the father was Portuguese and only spoke Portuguese. There wasn't much communication happening in that household, and it was all, he was born in the late 30s. It was about assimilation, and that sort of carried down into our family. And so it was always about doing and achieving, you know? And so going to the monastery, going to the mountains, and people laughed that I lived in the birdhouse, which, as Kim knows, is remote. It's a good place to continue to explore this, you know, because once it began, and yes, it's part of, we've used the word awakening. Awakening sounds so nice, but there's so much pain in awakening. Waking up to how much time has been lost, how much time I was walking around without really knowing myself, you know, sexually. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're finished?
Yes, I
because,
could keep going.
But no, it's what you're saying resonates a lot with me and my experience, because, you know, there was do not awaken, and your pleasure and sex, once in the context of a heterosexual marriage, was only something you engaged in together. So so I did not masturbate until much later, and I wasn't 30, but it was, you know, but for me, so this one story, you all can count, like I had this one sexual experience before my husband, and it's not knowing yourself. So in that one sexual experience, where like I never touched anything, and it was like everything was down there, and you know, and from this one experience where he digitally penetrated me, I said, oh my goodness, it went in so easily. After that, I started using tampons because I never wanted to try. I did not know where my own vagina was. Like I didn't know where it was. It was down there, right?
Yes.
They never touched it, you know. And I was like, oh wow, that was so easy. and then I had this experience where it was like I had this sensation, which I knew later was going to be an orgasm, but I was so scared I stopped it. I said, oh no, what's going on? Stop. He stopped.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later I realized, oh shoot, I missed out, right? That was. And it was unfortunate that a boy and a man could know my body better than me, and also, but I would say could not please me better than me.
Well, yeah.
And so what happened was, you know, there were times in which I would, you know, then obviously, you know, experience these orgasms, but and it was funny the first time, and I got scared again, and then Taylor was like, wait, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. So he is trying to lead me through this, but then there was a time where I still, it was like his job, you know, to please me, if you will.
Yeah.
But then there was this sense that pleasure should be experienced, and I wanted him to feel pleasure. So then I started faking it because it wasn't, right? And then I said, now it's been 15, I've been married 19 years. I haven't faked an orgasm in over 15 years. But at the time, it was like, you know,
She's in recovery.
I just want to say that, right? I know because I don't know my husband, but it's been a while, so I had this sexual awakening. But when I heard, don't fake, it's not good for you, it's not good for him, right?
Yes, right.
And so then it was like, all right, what makes me feel good? And I was like, can I go there? And so then it was like, yeah, I needed to, and then sex with him became so much more better when I could share. And so the question of do I teach it? I don't except I have a daughter, and I was like, you got to try it out, girlfriend, see what feels good to you, because it shouldn't be that some man knows you better than you, right? Or that introduces you to your body in a way that you haven't experienced. And that was my experience. So in terms of my children, yes, haven't gotten there with the church. When I read that question about self-care, I thought it was really interesting. I never thought about it in terms of self-care. I think it can be. I think, for people, I as somebody who is partnered, and I do, masturbate, and I have sex with him. I think for people who are not partnered, it might be like even that much more important as a self-care thing. But when I think about my own self-care, I don't think, I need to make sure,
Right.
But I think it could be, and I think it's part of and release and having orgasms. I think in the incorporation of toys and whatever aids, because again it was like, oh no, it's just got to be you and bodies and whatever body parts you have, and like toys are of the devil, and like pornography, all of that. But if it works for you, being comfortable, then I say do it.
Yes.
One thing that I love that you said was the association of pleasure with something bad. When you felt this orgasm coming on, you were like, no, this is.
Well, I didn't know what it
This
was.
cannot be good
Yeah.
because nothing that anyway. But
Yeah,
I just love
but it was.
that
I did.
You made that association.
Yeah, I did. I was
Sure.
like, oh, I was scared. And what's interesting with the meditation piece, when I started meditating, I realized when I have weird bodily sensations, I want to stop and fear. So I was having meditation. It wasn't. It reminded me of the orgasm, not because it felt like the orgasm exactly, but it was this like warmth, tingling sensation that scared me, and I was like, oh no. And it was only once I stayed with it and let it go that I was able to then experience the pleasure and of the meditation.
Yes.
Not in a sexual way, but it also made me thought about, don't they do tantric,
there's that,
there's that. I thought maybe, I'll get you to give me a lesson or something. I don't know. But that there was a connection there with being comfortable experiencing pleasure, in a different.
Anything else before?
I just want to say, so I've been teaching our whole lives for a long time, and the last time I'm teaching again now, but we haven't gotten to the masturbation film. But the masturbation film strip, which became a masturbation video, used to be like, oh my God, here we go, fasten your seatbelts, and we would talk to the kids, and it was like, oh my God, and we'd show them, and it'd just be their eyes could not have gotten bigger in their heads. Now, the last time I taught it, they all fell asleep. 100% of them are asleep.
How old?
But they're 13, 12, they're just bored by it now. And I think that's our culture has really shifted. So another message in all this is we are not getting to teach our kids about this. They're learning about it elsewhere. So if you want your kids to have a healthy attitude toward masturbation, sex, sexuality, whatever it is, you better grab the bull by the horn and get there early and often, right? Because otherwise, I don't know where these kids, I said to their parents, how do they know this? And they're just like, I don't know, they see it on TV, and I'm like, I don't own a TV. I'm like, they do? It's like, oh my God, okay, right? Yeah, so.
Masturbation. We're being very honest in this room tonight, huh? Well, I guess, like I was saying earlier, we all come in from different times in our lives. Unfortunately, I wasn't 30. I was young, 6th grade. and by myself, and I discovered some new things by myself, and I've enjoyed that. I was like very young when I saw my first pornography because, you know, like a lot of us, we found our dad's stash, you know, so I found his. And as a pastor, I still wrestle with my sexuality. I'm telling you. You know, I mean, you would be lying if you say you don't. And I have found for myself today that if I'm overworking myself mentally, physically, I need to call somebody. I call people. I have partners that I call so I can talk about, hey man, I'm feeling a little extra zealous today. Feel that roar of the lion. But if you're not honest about it, which is what we're doing here, and if you covet, you hide. You have opened up the door for so much. That's what happened to those priests. They covet, they hid. The more you hide, the more it grows. The more it grows and you hide, it explodes. So I can only say wherever you are in your own sexuality, that you should always find somebody that you can talk to about it.
Yeah.
Maybe your wife, maybe your friend, maybe a colleague.
Yeah.
Don't isolate.
Thank you. So I think I ran over time, but we're gonna do a lightning round. We're gonna do a lightning round of the questions from the
Therapy.
people.
Okay, good.
So succinct answers.
Okay.
Succinct.
You're talking to preachers.
We're a little
Very
Good thing we don't have
succinct.
microphones.
Okay. What would you tell someone who feels guilty about not waiting for marriage?
Get over it.
Okay. Anything else?
I was succinctly, it wouldn't come up. I mean, it just doesn't come up for us. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, get over it.
Go. You.
No.
No, you go. You.
Succinct.
You start.
You need a new theology.
Right, because I know if I had been told get over it, I'd be like, you are the devil. No. so it really is about. I would have a conversation about why they're waiting and how they view sex and emphasize that God is love and wants us to love ourselves and love the other people. And so
They're looking for permission.
and so
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
yeah.
Looking for verification.
But I think they're also looking for making meaning within their faith tradition, and that's what we've got to help them do. So we haven't talked about the Bible at all and how we do that. But that's important, and I think it would have been for someone like me. You would have had to talk to me with the language of my faith in order to really
Absolutely.
get it
That's
honored
not
before.
but yeah.
I would speak to the reality of abstinence, since I have been there for a period of my life after being so active. I would only offer them the best advice from my own experience, that it is better to wait. It's better to wait because, one, you will heighten your anticipation, your experience will be better, and you won't become distorted. We distort ourselves when we overindulge. And if you're honest with people and say, hey, I know what you're feeling. If you can, as Paul says, now we're getting into the Bible, hold off. But if you have that uncontrollable desire, then you're going to do it anyway. But as a man of God or a woman of God, you want to honor yourself with your body to your body. That's pastoral advice. Now, practical advice is, when you're feeling horny, you're going to go get horny. You're going to go be engaged. So to act like you're not feeling it, or the person not feeling is not being realistic.
But I think that you can also give pastoral advice from a Christian perspective that focuses on honoring the body. You can honor your body that God created you with and the sexual feelings, and how are you choosing to do that? What's the context? Like I'm not for random, sex with whoever, whatever, but to really then have a conversation. What is it that you're doing and you're expressing your sexuality with someone who is consenting, with someone who loves you, with someone who,
Or
then
you're feeling sexual with somebody that you're just feeling
if you
horny
want,
with.
so
Right.
if it's a matter of
Right.
you being objectified and or objectifying somebody else, then I might say go get an object. As a point, instead of a person, with whom we would want to engage in loving. And by loving, I don't necessarily mean it has to be like your life partner, but that we are called to love people, all people,
Yes.
and that our behaviors, our interactions with them ought to be to build up and to not tear down, to not denigrate.
Yeah.
So if you want an object, go get an object,
I got you.
is what I would say.
Amen.
Yeah.
Important.
So there, I know that we're supposed to be lightning quick.
Oh, right, I know.
There's just one little thing, like even though because I didn't mean to be dismissive about it, that even though it wouldn't be about wait until marriage, it doesn't mean pounce, So there's something about restraint that I think is very, very helpful and actually really sexy too, But it's about coming back to ourselves. I think ultimately when we talk about restraint, the non-pouncing, the not being so focused on the object of desire, but staying with this right here. And then seeing.
Yes.
We call that the 6-month rule in the monastery. Don't pounce.
Don't-
Okay, lightning round.
Lightning,
Okay.
okay.
Do you believe in virginity? If yes, do you see it as something holy or sacred? Holy/sacred.
Everybody's been a virgin at least once. It's hard to answer virginity. In what context? Is it
Yeah.
because I'm
Like,
waiting
in
to
other
get
words,
married?
I think the question is probably, do we hold that up as a virtue? Right?
For life.
That's the question.
Into life.
Yeah. We're a
It's
no
good
and
to
a no,
say it out.
obviously. It's so predictable.
Yeah.
Well, someone said, because I think of celibacy, in that, like the practice of celibacy could be intimacy with all beings, that you're available to everyone, that you haven't, cut yourself off. That's one way to look at it, maybe.
I don't believe in virginity. Like, I believe in God. I don't think it's a virgin. I think unfortunately it's been a harmful one, the standard that we lift up. I don't believe that sex is something you give away, or your virginity is something that you give away or is taken from you. Sex is an experience that you share with another human being and can be life-giving and ought to be life-giving. And so I don't hold it as sacred. I believe sex is sacred.
You see the panels having fun, huh?
Anyone else on this question? Okay. What for trans, intersex queer folk who are often forgotten, how do we open up these conversations? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to, go ahead.
No, it's just like open up these conversations.
The above are left out of the sexual norms.
In conversations about sexuality, creating spaces to talk about sex. There's been discussion of, the different kinds of attraction, different ways of sexual expression for people who have same-sex, desires, want that kind of experience, for people who experience, have questions about sexual identity. How do we expand the conversation to talk about not just sex as an act, but broadening it to the different kinds of relations involving sexuality?
Come to my church. No, I'm serious. I think you have to find a community where people are talking about it and where it's been completely normalized, so that people of all gender identities and affectional orientations are in conversation. And I think we're so lucky here in Boston in particular, but in Massachusetts or in the Northeast, that I don't think I've been, I am queer, I don't think I've been in a space where I felt unwelcome in recent memory. And that's very powerful. That's very, very powerful, especially as a middle-aged woman. You know? So yeah, find your tribe, right? Find your tribe and start talking. And my experience is like so many of my gay male friends, their best friends are straight women. I think they have a lot of the same sort of passions and you know, they share. So then that's their people that they talk to. And then the straight women can talk about what's going on with their husbands or whatever, and then the conversation begins to ripple. And I always think that's the conversations begin, those important conversations begin with straight women and gay men in the room. But eventually everybody's at the table. So I know that's true for us. Yeah.
And in my context, it's hard. I want to, and I have, but then people are afraid, and then there's been the history of gay bashing, of real violence done to people in the LGBT community, and I have personally been an ally. People have been able to talk to me. I struggle, and I want to continue to struggle to make my community one that really is open and that can be. Because I don't want to just say, even though I agree completely with you, and I have, unfortunately, the last church I pastored, I told a woman who came out to me who also wanted to go to ministry, I hate the fact that this is not a place for you, it's not safe for you. You need to go find, I want to help you find another community where you can really be your fullest self. It pained me to say that, but it was so true in that congregation. But I don't want it to be true. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
but you're
there's
the truth is invaluable.
But there's how do we? I realize the real risk that is for LGBTQ people in the transition, and how much courage it takes for them while you create that space. While I want to help create that, it takes that. So
I'm still somewhat conservative in some areas. I'm where she says she doesn't want to be. I want you to find, and I will help you find a place that you can talk, because as I said earlier, if you're not able to talk and express yourself, you are containing whatever it is that you're dealing with, good, bad, or indifferent. And everybody needs somebody to talk to. And so there are those conversations that are going on. They're going on right here in this room. I'm sure you have them on campus. I personally am a pastor who has learned to understand, because my sister is gay, what is the difference between not and those that do. And so I also come from a church tradition where there's a lot of don't talk, don't tell. I'm like, well, we need to talk. One, we need to understand who don't understand. And as we talk, we begin to understand. And so it's a question of being comfortable with yourself and being able to have an environment where you can feel comfortable with talking and sharing with others.
So there's something else here that's coming up. Can I interject here? So maybe it's because it's a Buddhist thing, it's about meditation, but I've also noticed that some people don't want to talk about difference. That there's a woman in our Sangha who's trans, and she doesn't, and we have a relationship, so I check things out, and I've said, I wonder if we should start, when we do go-arounds in classes, use pronouns now, with that, and she's like, I don't really want to do that, because there's a way in which she wants to just be a person. She wants to be a human being who's sitting zazen. We call it, she's a zazen person. She's coming to sit in meditation, which is very interesting because something similar like this happened a few years back with someone else who is a native Spanish speaker who wanted to hear this Dharma, who wanted to hear the teachings in her native language. And so we started offering a class, Dharma en Español, and she started coming at the beginning, but then after a while she stopped coming. And when we talked about it, I realized that was just a gate for her. She didn't want to be segregated into the person who comes to the Zen Center to hear Dharma en Español. It was a provisional means. Like, it was just a measure to just feel like she could enter. And then once she's entered, just a member of the Sangha. So there's that point of view too, and I don't mean to ignore the importance of difference, that question, but I just wanted to make sure we talked about that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question?
Yeah.
One last question. Okay, which one? I'm gonna ask two at the same time. The first one, are some kinks/fetishes inherently wrong against God? And the other one, what does your theology or tradition have to say about polyamory, about orgies?
You looking at me? It's all about as long as nobody gets hurt.
I was looking at her, so hey.
Just
You
as
take
long
the
as
ball.
nobody gets hurt. It's like, you know, I can say things about this Pope, but I did love when he said, "Who am I to judge?" You know, I just
That's
thought that
it.
was a beautiful thing to say and a helpful and hopeful thing to say. Yeah.
Because that's it. I mean, no one in this room has a moral compass to measure anyone else's isms. But as a pastor, as an evangelical Christian, I believe in the holiness of God. And the Bible teaches us there are certain restrictions that we should be about. You know, we just can't go indulge everywhere we want to indulge because we become deranged. We become off the chart, as we say. You will start doing things, if you left yourself alone long enough, no telling what you'll come up with to fill yourself up. And that's the reality. I talked to men the other day, one of the most important words in the English language is, does anybody know what that is? It's no. It's the person who can master no with love has a certain, what do I want to say?
This would be a good sermon.
It is. I preached it.
Yeah.
It allows you to say, I can say yes, but I'm saying no because I want to become more than what I am. That's what it says. It says that I realize that I'm human and I will do human things, but I'm looking to find a path to a holy God. And for pastors in this room who are trying to find that, you're going to need that power in order to minister to the needs of God's people and to represent a holy God in your humanity. It's on you, Rev.
You talking about?
Yeah, I'm throwing it over there.
So, I thought about this question before it came. I don't know about a whole lot of kinks and fetishes. I think I'm generally of the mind about this whole, that nobody gets hurt. I deeply believe that sex is beautiful between, it's not just two consenting adults because, there are issues of power, you can consent, there may be dynamics, but that people are interacting as people, as full, as their full selves. Mm-hmm. And I think that is important. Mm. And so I don't want to be in the, because to me it's not just about what produces an orgasm or gets your rocks off. I mean, I think that's valuable. Your physical urges and stuff are there, are important, are valuable. But some of the things, even when I think about BDSM, I don't know. I know there's a lot about consent in BDSM. I think the things that disturb me, people being dehumanized, like that disturbs me. I'm not going to say, you should not go and do that. I mean, if you're consenting, I'm not. I got other things to worry about than you and your, whatever. But I do think, from what I want to be more constructive about what I believe is good and holy, and I believe that that sex and sexuality between people bringing their full humanity together is important. And in terms of polyamory, I think it's fine. In terms, the people work it out and consent and all of that's there. But for me, schedules, whatever. But for me, it's really about honoring and affirming the humanity and personhood of people, and sharing that, the divinity and the sacredness in one another.
Yeah. I think for me, it is the teaching of ahimsa is foremost. I think non-harming, not harming, and then from there that it's all practice and it's all learning and it's all refining our lives, or going deeper into who we are and what we value and how we receive pleasure, how we value pleasure. So I think the way I would engage with that is, can you, if that is coming up, if there are invitations in your life, to explore this, to do so consciously and to do so with a spirit of curiosity and kindness to yourself and others.
Yeah, it's kindness. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There were 2 questions that we didn't have time to ask. One about learning more about sexual ed in the UU tradition, and sexual education taught in a religious context and how you can get involved in that. Reverend Kim said she would be available to talk more about that after this is over. I don't know about anyone else.
Absolutely.
For the talk.
But thank you all. So now we're going to welcome Gretchen.
I'm just going to close this out really quick from right here and just say thank you to our panelists for being here and your honesty and your vulnerability and some of the awkwardness that we all stand in, because these are conversations that aren't had often enough. So I also want to say thank you to Chastity for guiding us through this conversation. And for Kim and everyone else who put this together. And thank you for all of you who are here. I really hope that you carry this with you and begin to have these conversations more often in your own places of being, worship, homes, lives, wherever you take it. And I think Reverend Joan is going to close us out with a prayer.
Yes. So I thought we could do a little meditation. And you can consider it prayer. It's just about being quiet with ourselves, as a way to just, with all this interaction and words, concepts, we are in these bodies. So just taking a moment to appreciate that. I have this bell, the beautiful neutral sound of the bell of peace, as Reverend Bernadette said at the beginning, opening to peace, right in the fullness of our aliveness, right in the fullness of whatever we're feeling after this evening's experience with each other. Whatever's going on with you is yours, and it's perfect. So just taking a moment to be in that while we're still together. I'm going to ring this bell. As you're opening to that sound, just feeling your feet firmly making contact with the floor, grounding yourself, feeling your hips on your chair, feeling your spine long so that your heart can open to shine in full feeling. Whether or not your eyes are closed or open, just let them rest softly, at ease. Let the tongue hang heavy in your mouth. Let your brain just float, freed up in the cavity of the skull. And as you breathe in, let your lungs expand fully, receiving oxygen. And as you breathe back out, let your lungs soften, releasing whatever it is that you don't need, CO2 and anything else. Staying with that for just a couple rounds of breathing in, expanding, opening, receiving, and breathing out, releasing, settling, letting go, grounding. Let's just stay here for a moment or two in silence, breathing together in grounded openness. From this bodily posture of grounded openness, with all the work we've done here tonight together, the play, the conversation, the exploration, right in the midst of all of this, maybe you'll give rise to a prayer, an intention, a wish for you yourself that you can feel free to repeat silently if you'd like. It's the traditional loving kindness prayer. Returning to love. May I be happy, breathing it. May I be peaceful, opening to it. May I be free from suffering, believing in it. And very importantly, foundationally, may I be safe. Taking a deep breath, grounding ourselves in happiness, peace, freedom, and safety. Able to offer that to everyone in this world, beginning within this room and extending out from there. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be safe. In celebration of our whole selves, in our whole expression. Love.